So in this video, I'm going to give you an update of the goings-on in Sudbury. Still more contention over the decision to cancel the Market Hill experiment. And this episode is going to be the start of a slight change in direction for this channel. Instead of just watching and critiquing what's going on in councils, we feel it's time we started to come up with solutions. Otherwise, really, what's the point of just moaning? So I'm going to float a few ideas for you, the audience, to consider, and I hope that in return you also will come up with some cunning plans as to how we can sort out our councils and ultimately our country. So let's start with the shenanigans in Sudbury. Those of you that saw parts 1 and 2 will know that initially they wanted to not only start charging for car parking fees in drive-through towns that have enjoyed free parking, which is why they are still alive and well, and as a double whammy in Sudbury, the council took it upon themselves to decide that it would be a great idea to have a cafe culture experiment and shut off all the parking on Market Hill and close it off with expensive planters and then have cafes so that people could not park in front of the shops they're trying to visit, which would be a little inconvenient for the elderly and infirm. It is exceptionally naive to think that taking the car parking spaces away from these businesses whose customers are often elderly, that isn't going to affect their business. When you consider the number of days a year in the UK one can actually have a coffee outside in comfort, and the fact that hardly any of the business owners wanted this in the first place does make it feel rather ill-conceived. Whilst myself and many do believe that Councillor Smith made the right decision and rectified the great wrong of not listening to all the business owners properly in the first place, it does raise a question about democracy. What was the point of going through the democratic process and then have one person be able to overturn it? So here's what another Suffolk councillor had to say on the matter. The decision, we have found out, was taken on Friday in a closed meeting, no public, no minutes, no councillors or the proposers of the scheme, or the evidence of the businesses that supported the scheme, as many of them have already paid for the pavement licences, etc., to try to be part of this long-running experimental road order. So this email bothered me greatly, so I asked some more questions about whether this was a normal thing to have happened. And the reply was technically the director or assistant director of the Highways Service, in discussion with the portfolio holder, have the right to make a delegated decision. However, when there is an obvious controversial road traffic order, the County Council has a committee of elected councillors that vote on this at a public meeting with a public available written report, and people can speak to the proposal for and against, etc. And then, when all the evidence is heard, the Development and Regulation Committee can then vote to either refuse, approve, amend, or even decide to go on a site visit to look for themselves. That would have meant a number of councillors would have been accountable for making sure the decision was a sound one, made in public in the full glare of all sides. So I was rather concerned by this, so I discussed it with the Sudbury Chamber of Commerce and also local people. And the Chamber of Commerce told me that when they did that survey, virtually nobody wanted to be part of that scheme. So they were very surprised to hear that people had already paid for these licences. So somebody locally did a Freedom of Information request to find out exactly how many businesses had signed up for this. And this is the response. The licensing team is not aware of anyone who was interested in using the Market Hill for a pavement licence if the Market Hill experiment took place. Now, a pavement licence, for those that don't know, is basically a way the councils extort, usually £100 a year, out of cafes to allow them to have furniture on the pavement. So if nobody has applied to do this, how exactly were they going to create this cafe culture when none of the cafes there wanted any part of it? And the acting leader of Baber District Council, John Wood. So much had been planned for this space, and the decision to be done at a last minute quite absurd. It's ruined the summer for Sudbury. And then Councillor Jessie Carter decided she'd stick her oar in as well, just at the point we thought she had started to redeem herself with her voting. She, apparently, submitted a complaint and suggested concerns raised during the town council meeting did not reflect the true sentiment of the town's businesses. Did she not even bother to read the Sudbury Chamber of Commerce survey, where around 50 businesses said no, they didn't want this? She then went on to say, there may have been a room full of people speaking out against the experimental traffic regulation orders. There definitely was, dear. I was there, and so were you eventually, at the Town Council in March, but they had been advertised to do so. Yes, people may well have been told, if you don't like this, come along, but it didn't mean to say if you did like it, you couldn't come along. There was one lady that stood up and said she wanted the cafe culture experiment, but the rest of the room, who was absolutely heaving, was thoroughly against it. And she doesn't seem to think that's representative. I see. Then Councillor Sandy Martin, speaking on behalf of the Labour group, chipped in. He said, Sudbury could be a magnet for residents and visitors if it were more visitor-friendly, and added that the town council, local councillors, residents and even the county council officers had been working together to produce a sensible plan. Goodness knows what a silly plan would have been. Anyway, and now we get to the nub of the matter. We are committed to cleaner air, safer streets, more vibrant and enjoyable neighbourhoods and more environmentally sustainable transport. The actions of the current county cabinet member fly in the face of all those commitments. Aha! Yes, don't they just? Allowing people to come into town with their cars. One does wonder if he's ever actually been to Sudbury. Now, people often accuse me of being a snob, and perhaps it's my snobbery coming into play now, but I cannot see for the life of me how sitting in an abandoned car park next to a main road is going to magnetically attract a whole load of visitors to Sudbury. Now, if there wasn't a main road and there were lots of lovely mature trees and flowers, and yes, it was beautifully landscaped, then I would agree it would be a lovely place for a cafe culture experiment. But it's not. There's a main road and it will be an empty car park. Especially as, might I remind you, none of the local cafes, none, that's a big zero, had bought a pavement licence. Nobody was going to do it. Nada. And bearing in mind this experiment was due to start in the middle of May, it's clear those licences would have been purchased by now if anyone was going to partake. So it does rather look like Councillor Smith has saved a taxpayer from a £10,000 bill to cordon off the parking for an area of cafe culture that overwhelmingly wasn't supported. Whilst the council are utterly obsessed with footfall, it's not how many feet you have, it's how much people are spending. And those people in cars tend to spend more than someone on foot. These obvious things aside, democracy clearly isn't working as it should. So, as I said at the beginning, we need to come up with ways ourselves to improve things, because people are absolutely desperate. It's both concerning and amusing, the number of comments I get with people telling me I should be running a council, or even funnier, the country. When, let's face it, you know nothing about me. You don't even know if I could run a coffee shop, let alone a council, or the country for that matter. It's like people have decided, yes, let's get the garden designer in to run the country. Yes, we'd still be bankrupt, but gosh, the place would look very pretty with all that landscaping she'd do. And with a bit of luck, she'd sort out the illegals coming in with a giant perimeter of pyrocanth around the entire country. Yes, let's get her in to run it. Well, let's not. What I'm much more interested in is for us to come up with systems so that it doesn't matter who runs countries and councils, they need to be as idiot-proof as possible. Because looking into Baber District Council, on paper, it should have been ideal because there are so many independents in it. But what we've noticed studying them is that actually, without the coherence of a party with a definite way they want to go, there seems to be all these weird decisions. There isn't the structure that is needed. So many times I've said, oh, we need to fund and get as many independent people in as possible. But now I'm looking at it thinking, actually, that's not really going to be the ultimate answer. Funnily enough, halfway through filming this video, I got an email from an ex-councillor who saw a video I'd done where I suggested we fund getting more independent councillors, and he too had come to the same conclusion that actually independence does not mean that you'll get a good council. So let me just read you a snippet from the email he sent. So he started out by saying that people that run as independent councillors are usually good eggs, but they do have to form a group. So then you have a group of independent councillors with no policy position, no strategic view of directing the council. What happens is the officers run the agenda. So the local issues that they were elected on get totally bypassed, the blob takes over, and we see this with the issues of climate emergency being called by district councils, etc. Did any of these elected councillors have on their election material anything about a climate emergency, other than maybe the Greens? We have a good example of this action at Baber. Since 1972, it has only ever had one administration in 2015. The rest of the time has been no overall control. It's not really performed that well. The way around this problem is to have local groups bypass the old political parties, like-minded people who want to make changes and reflect the views of the people they represent. Stand on a set of deliverable policies, not like some resident associations who end up being removed for maladministration. To be effective, they need to be a force with voting majority on the council. Without that, nothing will happen, just be an ignored protest group. They also need to understand the roles and function of the council. Many have no understanding of the statutory requirements, so I agree it would be great to support independent, but having all these individuals not as one would be even worse than the current situation. We almost need to produce a draft manifesto that prospective councillors can sign up to, agreed policy positions intersected with local issues. This needs a lot more thought, but I just wanted to get down on paper with my initial ramblings. So some excellent points made here. But what concerns me is if we keep recreating the same old thing over and over, we're relying on, whether you call it a political party or not, whatever you call it, you're relying on a group of good people doing the right thing. And that works for a set time, but what happens when those people go? You can't guarantee that the next lot and the next lot are also going to do things that serve the people. And also, how many people are good in positions of power and don't abuse it? So we need to come up with a system that bypasses all of that. So I've had a couple of ideas that I think might help the situation, and I'm hoping that together you, the audience, can come up with some even better ideas. The first one can be implemented right away by councillors, and that would be to set up an email newsletter that goes out to everybody in their ward, and it could go out once a fortnight or once a month with the local ward councillor saying, here's what's coming up at the council this month, here's what I've got to vote on, here's what I think we should do, what's your opinion, and have a poll in that email that people can click on, vote this way, vote that way, so that when these councillors are going in to vote, they actually know what their constituents in their ward want, rather than how it seems to play out at the moment, where some councillors think they're God just because they've been voted for, so therefore whatever they think goes. So that would, one, alert people to what's happening, so that things can't just get slid in with these consultations that come and go before you know it, and you don't get a chance to voice your opinion. Also, I think we, the people, should decide what our essential services are, get a breakdown of costs, and that our council tax goes definitely to pay the absolutely essential services that we've all agreed on. And then any extras could be by contribution. So for example, if you love the parks, you could decide to contribute an extra £10 a month to keep those parks going, or whatever. So that the essential services get paid for, and then everything else is contribution, not extortion. And then we're less likely to end up with our money spent on things that the majority of us really don't want or need. And those that do want those things, well, they can fundraise for those. And also we should look at keeping our services provided by local businesses and not ones that come from miles away, thus creating our own economies, looking after our own areas. But we need to find a way of doing this so that we don't get swept up in communitarianism or collectivism, that we still keep our sovereignty and our individuality, but yet we enable ourselves to work together and make sure that we don't get sucked into doing things for the greater good, because we've seen how that works out through history. The greater good is very rarely good. So it's down to us individually to protect and look after our sovereignty, yet come together to sort things out in a way that does benefit us all. And that's quite a difficult tightrope to walk. But I think more transparency and councillors that are actually serving our needs and not a bigger agenda would be a good first start. But one last thing that has happened in Sudbury is that they have had the first stage of legal proceedings. A letter before action has gone out to notify the council of all the breaches they have made by enforcing these car parking charges on communities that clearly don't want it. I found out that it wasn't just 8,500 people that said they didn't want it. The number was actually 10,500, but the council rejected those that didn't live within Baber District Council. So these car parking charges go against the public will, and they will be damaging to the local economy and businesses. So in a video coming very soon, I'm going to interview the paralegal that has helped the people of Sudbury put this letter together, and we'll walk through it step by step so you can understand what he's done and what breaches have occurred, which may be useful for you in your area. So that's the Sudbury Roundup. Can you guess what will be in the next video? Yes, back to Gloucester. I know, I'm ping-ponging between each one of them. It seems inevitable, but a lot more has happened there. There's a lot of shenanigans going on in Gloucester. They are trying incredibly hard to stop Matthew Randolph from being voted in as the Independent Police Crime Commissioner. And boy, are they doing some underhand tactics. Let's put it this way, I don't think it's just the BBC that are going to be sued. I think a councillor is as well, but we'll give you the full story in the next episode. Two more things before we go. If you're in the Thetford area, there's a public meeting that you need to attend in the Carnegie Halls on the 30th of April. Be there or be square, as they used to say back in my day. Finally, I've had quite a busy week with interviews. I got to speak to the very lovely David Curtin and Eli Everyman. Links to those videos in the description below. So until next time, take care. Bye-bye.